Eventually, that will get more and more granular as AI makes it so much easier to customize news. And we'll say, all right, I know this person, you like your news exactly on this spectrum. So once we all are consuming news in a way that we are kind of hyper wired to enjoy it, it aligns our confirmation bias, that gets us down this path where we're not at all looking at any kind of objective source of truth.
Hello, and welcome to AI Curious. My name is Jeff Wilser. I'm a journalist, I'm a human, and I'm curious about AI. So recently I was in Davos during the World Economic Forum week, and I was honored to do a couple of things there. To peel back the curtain, I co-hosted and co-produced an AI salon, an event for cocktails and bites that brought together leaders in AI space. We had some in-depth conversations that was actually featured in the New York Times front page story covering AI in Davos. So thank you again, New York Times. I was also honored to speak about the future of media at an event at Davos Week at the UnDavos conference. And we had some really great conversations about where media is headed. They generously allowed this panel to be distributed here on the AI Curious podcast. So thank you again to UnDavos for letting us share this conversation here. So without too much preamble, going to run a slightly cleaned up and edited version of that panel. We got into a lot of the pretty important angles and threads and subplots of where media is headed. And they did a great job convening different perspectives on this panel. We hear from traditional media, traditional journalism, also entrepreneurs who are building kind of cool solutions in the space, as well as someone who has had a life in politics and political strategy and how that's shaping media, as well as the comms and PR side to hear that perspective. The speaker here are Lexi Mills, who did a brilliant job moderating this conversation, Mark Collar, Francesca Gagaya, and Johnny Gabriel. I'll let Lexi introduce folks properly, but those are the key players, if you will. Again, not too much preamble here, but I will say, I think this is my first time publicly going on record sharing some of my thoughts and concerns about the intersection of media and AI. As I described at Davos, yes, there are opportunities and upsides here, but I'm pretty troubled by many of the elements of misinformation and erosion of trust and what happens when we all get hyper-personalized, hyper-customized news thanks to AI. But for now, please enjoy this discussion at Davos on the future of media.
Today, we're going to be speaking on the future of media, news, and entertainment. So the future of news isn't just about formats and new platforms. It's about trust, attention that is technically engineered as well as human-fueled. Audiences are fragmenting, traditional news consumption is declining, and we have this huge rise of personality-led media, which is reshaping how people encounter information. And often it's outside the traditional institutions that we all grew up with. Combined with this, we have misinformation that is now spreading at an exponential rate, and we're able to produce it in a way that we never could before. When I put together this panel, one of the things I was really passionate about is that this wouldn't be so much a nostalgia panel or even a technology bashing panel, but a discussion about how do we look forward? How do we build the economic models that sustain trust and truth in the future? So I'm really happy to welcome some of our fabulous panelists today. First of all, to my right, we have Mark Collar. He is a partner at ProSec, an integrated marketing and communications firm. He has spent more than 40 years as a journalist and media specialist, developing stories for business impact and the financial world. And I'm also really excited to welcome Francesca to the panel. So Francesca Gagaya, did I get that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, is the co-founder and CEO of Social Plus, a platform that helps companies transform their apps into engaging communities. And I'm really excited to have Jeff Wilser here today. He's a journalist and AI strategist. He's an author of 8 books. We had a fabulous conversation about some of them. I will leave you to disclose which ones you want to talk about first. Some of them are on the more humorous side. He is the host of AI Curious, which is a podcast, and he's the producer and host of the AI Summit at Consensus. So you were deeply entrenched in really the technology behind the future of news that's supporting it. And I'm sure we're going to have some fantastic conversations around that. What I would really love to know is, how do you feel about misinformation and bias and accuracy as a technology expert?
Yeah, thanks so much. It's great to be here. In a way, this is deeply personal for me, and this sits kind of in between my two worlds. I've been a longtime journalist for 20 years for places like New York Times, Wired, and I'm used to that world in one sense. And now, as deeply involved in AI, as so many of us are, in the technology AI space, it's like half my friends are journalists and editors who are terrified, and half my friends are kind of tech optimists. And there's these kind of two, almost two opposing forces right now of AI is making things easier to do. At the same time, we all trust it less. So the question is, which of these forces will win out? And my one word answer is pain. I think that media is in deep trouble. But it's important to remember that was the case before AI, right? There are extremely systemic macro issues of why media has been a shrinking pie for a long time. And AI is starting to accelerate those trends. So I'm optimistic about many, many, many things involving AI. Media is not at the top of my list of things that I'm optimistic about.
It's really interesting to highlight that they were in a bad position before. I was listening to a story last night about the history of coffee and how coffee had so much backlash, like government backlash. There were legal bans on it initially. It took a long time to roll out. You know, our initial reactions to new things, whether it be technology or even the first advertisement that was the first recorded one that I found was in the Boston Globe. And I read all the letters to the editors that came in over the weeks after, and people talking about this will never catch on, real backlash, feeling like their personal space is being invaded by this new thing. The human condition isn't primed to respond without fear to new things, and that does underpin our ability to survive. But I do think you're correct. A lot of these problems are being pinned on some technology, but actually it's the fear of new emerging things, the unknown. Which is why I do think it is prudent for us to look back now and again and remember where we were frightened before and how we coped. And with that in mind, I'd also like to introduce our final panelist for today, Mr. Johnny Gabriel. He is an entrepreneur and tech investor with a history in political consulting. So if there's ever an area where we are concerned about misinformation and the tactics that are being used, Johnny has been behind all of that. Johnny, I remember you mentioning a while ago about different social media campaigns that were being done a long time ago to target specific individuals with certain information. Could you say a word towards that, just to give some context to everyone about misinformation and also targeted information?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. The things we're all afraid of, to echo what Jeff was saying, we've been doing them for 20, 25 years. I mean, we can even go as far back as yellow journalism, right? Misinformation was basically my job for 7 years, not because we were trying to willfully mislead, but because it becomes a little bit of an arms race. If so-and-so is going to say X and you don't respond with an equal measured thought on the issue, you're losing the battle. And if you lose the battle, you'll never win the war. And so, yeah, we've been forced to do misinformation for decades now, and it's only getting easier, faster, and more replicable with AI.
Just to give a little bit of context to myself, my name's Lexi Mills. I have been on the internet before I could write, so I could code before I could write. I remember the internet before search engines, and I spent ages on it. And when I was around 7 years old, I moved out to South Africa. And this was just as we moved from apartheid South Africa to the new South Africa. And in school, they rewrote history every 6 months, which as a child is extremely distressing because the bad guy is now the good guy. And if you put them down wrong on the test, they're like, no, that was last week. And so I started to collect all my history books. Even my mathematics textbooks had different biases in them. And so from a very young age, I didn't believe that there was an absolute truth. I knew there were truths, and I knew how politics would influence those. And so as I grew up, I worked in music, which was a lot of fun because it was the beginning of social media and the very beginning of us being able to do more direct to fan engagement, and then moved into news. And I now run an algorithm-based comms firm. But this has been a passion of mine for so many years. And AI is really just exacerbating it from my perspective. And sometimes we need to make things worse before we make them better. And at this point, I think the spotlight is bigger, but I don't think, from my perspective, that the actual issue is massively different because it did exist before the technology. Now,
can I add
Yes.
one thing to what you said when you mentioned the word media? I think I'd love to talk at some point today about how the definition of media has changed so much. I was at a dinner last night and the client called to say, you need to be with me. I'm going to be in a room and I'm worried about what the media how the media will interpret what I'm saying. And I'm like, there's no reporters there. What is he talking about? But what he was concerned about was people will be recording him.
Yeah, everyone in this room is the media in a
Right.
sense, right?
And no matter what I said, if there was Chatham House rules, no one is going to do that. He said, I need to go over all the talking points and stay on message for this conversation. So that was a big concern for me, and a light bulb, or however you want to describe it, was his definition for this old CEO at a big established firm. He was that at that moment having a bigger, wider definition of media than I am, and I'm in the business. So like it's changing the way we have to approach everything.
with that in mind, that sounds a lot like reputation. So we used to think about media as a means of getting information out, but now media seems to encompass reputation from beginning to end. And so what he's concerned about is his reputation and potentially an indelible mark being made on that. Would that be correct?
100%. I do a lot of media training. And when I start every training session, I ask the person, what do you read and how do you read it? Everyone says they read their media online. That is not a surprise. And when I ask them, where are the stories coming from? They can't name the name. They can't name the title of the outlets. They said, I'm reading a summary. So they do not know if it's a legacy brand, a Substack post, something from LinkedIn. And I think that's another big concern.
Which has a profound impact, right? Right. And the economic, I'm sure we'll get into the economics of the industry and how incentives have shifted and how revenue models have shifted / devolved / melted down into oblivion. So that's a big problem that I think we're still trying to figure out what the answer is.
Yeah, the thing with AI is that, it feels like it came onto the scene like 2 or 3 years ago. It's like, no, we've had AI for 20 years. It's called the algorithm, right? Machine learning was first weaponized against us when Facebook and all those different social medias stopped becoming just a wall of your friends and started becoming a prediction mechanism to try and show you exactly what you wanted to see to stay on as long as possible. And unfortunately, what works is anger and fear. And so, Mark, I could be your client one day. Give me another 2 years. And I fear social media. On Twitter, I'm anonymous. I don't use my real name because the mob, right? It's like, it feels like the algorithm rewards, the incentives reward like mob angry behavior. And so then why would I throw myself into that meat grinder?
So with that in mind, this rings very deeply true of the fashion industry of the last 20, 30 years, where we designed an image that was almost unobtainable. And that became almost a norm. We had this second flow of eating disorders and body dysmorphia. Do you think that perhaps this fear of the indelible imprint of the widening of media is actually altering what truth comes out in a way, never mind how misinformation is crafted? I'm thinking what I'm hearing here is that there is misinformation created by fear because there is no ad lib if someone's sticking to a script. There is no accountability if we're hiding behind aliases or too scared to speak. I'd love to hear all of your views on that.
Well, I think Johnny is a very reasonable, smart person, as I'm sure Mark's client. I think that might not be the majority of people. I think that there are, for better or worse, millions, if not billions, people who have no fear and are happy to throw themselves online all the good, the bad, and the ugly and say whatever they want, no matter how true or false that is. So it's interesting. It almost reminds you of a center cannot hold, right? If the things fall apart and we have people who are like maybe a little more measured and concerned, deciding not to share, that's a big problem when you have the majority of people overly sharing nonsense that gets spread virally.
One of the things that I think we need to consider here is that how highly speed is valued. So about 7 years ago, Bloomberg announced that it valued speed over accuracy. And speed and clickable headlines seem to determine far more what is published. And that seems very true across all platforms now, when it's a little bit more alarming with Bloomberg because they influence markets. But I know you have some views on this.
I have so many comments here. But first of all, like how speed is trumping accuracy. That's a big danger. When I was a reporter in the 80s, and Bloomberg was a new terminal, they were the first outlet to print the press release whole as soon as it came to them by fax. Okay. My job when I got that fax from Ford about their earnings was to call Ford and confirm they sent it to me. By the time that happened, Bloomberg had the story up. Now, everyone knows when you write a press release, the good news is the lead. So that became the lead for everyone. And it made the job really hard to do the second day story within 5 minutes. So that started a long, long time ago, this speed. But on legacy brands, I agree with you that the legacy brand model is broken, for sure. But if there is a big story in the world, I still will go to CNN first to see how it's being covered and see the 24-hour news cycle of that story. Or I'll go to the New York Times, not in the morning, but when I come home, I get 5 print publications delivered to my apartment. I'll read those in the evening. I will still go there and feel it's more trusted.
Mark, I do too, but I fear this. We are on our way out, right?
Yeah,
I think you're out. I don't know. My guess is your average 14-year-old, 18-year-old, 22-year-old, they are not like
100%
for New York Times, CNN, like which I think it's a tragedy as a longtime journalist, but I think we're headed. My big thesis here is we're headed toward micro targeting, micro personalized news. With AI, we're all eventually going to have our little personalized Walter Cronkite that's giving you the news just the way you want.
Right. No, I agree with you 100%. And at the dinner 2 weeknights ago, when I had the first female Time reporter at the table, I had a guy from Harvard who was studying news and the media. I tried to get him on our panel. And I said, well, how do you answer that question? What's the future of media? He goes, personalities. 100%. I have 3 podcasters, and that's where I go to every single day. I'll get you on his list for sure. But you're right.
I think there's an interesting thing here around the economics as well, because economics makes something more appealing. And I don't know if anyone's been down to the Time magazine house at the moment. We were discussing earlier that it kind of looks like a shack. And we were trying to work out, is this deliberate? Is this like commentary? Because right next door is Meta. And Meta looks sexy. It looks beautiful. It looks inspiring. And I think this bait that's being used to draw different audiences in is also influencing things. And if that's coming down to economics, then the question is, how do we get to a place where the economics of truth are viable? Because fact checking is critical, but there are very few ways to absolutely do it unless you take time. Time seems to be a factor we can't use. There are fact checking tools, but they are not instilled within the nature of our publications. So is this an economic or a systemic requiring legislation challenge to ensure that truth and accuracy has an opportunity to survive, and therefore some of the elements of traditional journalism? Francesca, do you have some thoughts on that?
I think we're putting a lot of different things together, because when we talk about fake news, for example, like I don't think that they represent the majority of the problem. So the great majority of news that are posted by reputable brands are actually fairly fact-checked. Sometimes, of course, the speed is very important. But at the end of the day, I trust, I would like to say, big media companies or reputable sources when they publish news. The problem is that if we consume this news on TikTok or on Instagram, then we are part of this gigantic echo chamber where our feed will just keep showing us content that goes in the same direction and is very similar. So the algorithm and the way then these news are feed to us, it's pretty much completely out of control. So I was witnessing this. I was sitting next to a friend when the war in Palestine started, and I made a comment. I don't want to go into anything, political, but I made a comment saying, "Wow, it seems that everybody is talking about Israel and why they're doing this." And it was like, "Whoa, really?" Everybody's talking about Palestine. And then we open our phones and our feed were showing us a different word. And this made me realize that it's not about what's published. It's about what we believe is true based on what we see.
Yeah.
Francesca, I love what you're doing. And I love that you're giving brands platforms that people can, trusted media can be put in. But I fear that if 5 of them are successful and they get all of their people to move away from Twitter and TikTok onto their platforms, the next logical step is to get more people to come and to put different content on. And if you fast forward 12 months, we're just going to have another social media
Probably, but it's a different revenue model, right? So social media make money out of engagement. So they really don't care at all about the quality of what's posted, because the only way that it's relevant for them to make money is to keep you attached to the screen. So the quality of the content doesn't make any sense. But if you are on the platform of the Washington Post, they make money based on the number of readers they have. So quality as a way more important angle rather than just keeping people on the screen.
Could we take a moment to look at, I know we've spoken about context and where people are receiving information, but I think we've got 2 people on this panel who are used to writing or producing long-form content, books, podcasts. And I think a secondary challenge to this is attention span. So you'll realize maybe like 10 years ago, all the social share buttons moved from the bottom of articles to the top. And that's because most people don't read to the bottom. So shares went up significantly by moving them up. And I think one of the greater challenges, if we take deliberate misinformation out, accidental because you're focusing on speed, and then you look at how do you tell a story accurately in a headline? How do you think we tackle this problem? Mark, do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, it's a big problem. It's going to be tough to solve. I remember talking to a journalist from The Guardian who wrote what he thought was the best story about the upcoming French election. This was several years ago. And the newsroom was very excited about it. And he had a classic headline, and it got no traction. He read what was being developed what was the content that was taking over platforms, and New Direction had put out a new album. So he rewrote the headline to read, "French election seen taking new direction." It became the most linked on story in the history of The Guardian that year. So there is an art to writing these headlines that I don't think is misinformation, but you're directing the reader in a certain way.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah. There's 66 characters in a Bloomberg headline. So I'm very careful to making sure I have all the news in that headline when I'm talking to the reporter.
I think Johnny made a great point earlier, mentioning how misinformation has been around not just for decades, but for centuries. I wrote a book years ago about Alexander Hamilton and studied the Revolutionary era and learned a lot about the misinformation and smear campaigns between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson in the first presidential election. And it was wild how they would make these ad hominem, like vicious attacks, not the two of them themselves, but their kind of their minions and so on. So it's been around. What's different, I fear, is that, and to your question, Lexi, which is an excellent question about how we're creating, distributing, how we're framing things. And Mark's totally right that we've done for a long time. We can slant headlines to make it kind of take this one part of the piece and blow that out of proportions. The whole thing feels different. I think, though, to me, it goes back to the logical endpoint, and that's personalization. For a while, we went from the original, okay, here is the truth. That fracture, do we have right media and left media? And then we kind of have like, okay, far right, medium right, far left, center left, but there's all kind of buckets. I think eventually that will get more and more granular as AI makes it so much easier to customize news. And we'll say, all right, I know this person, you like your news exactly on this spectrum. And then when that personalized Walter Cronkite also happens to be your health coach and your chief of staff saying, oh, you have a meeting at 3:00 today. That reminds, don't forget that you should mention to Sarah, who you're meeting with, that last night news broke about this product release, right? So once we all are consuming news in a way that we are kind of hyper wired to enjoy it, and it aligns our confirmation bias, that gets us down this path where we're not at all looking at any kind of objective source of truth. And that, to me, is a systemic problem that I don't think we can solve through regulation. I don't think there's a clean, clear economic model for like the truth, just as there's not really a clean economic model for helping to prevent climate change damage, right? It's just a bigger problem any one person can solve. And sorry for being such a I'm sorry, doom and gloomer here, but it's a real concern.
I'm happy you equated the two because I have the same philosophy for both. Like climate change will do a 180 when it becomes profitable to clean shit up, and misinformation will become less when it becomes profitable to correct the record. And I think we do have what I'm really passionate about are micropayments and different types of blockchain technologies that can allow us to facilitate these things. But it's really hard to agree to pay $20 a month to 3 different organizations when you're already having a hard time making rent. But paying 3 cents per article for someone on a Patreon that I trust, and granted, confirmation bias is a hell of a drug, and so it has to get so bad, unfortunately, that I think people are going to crave.
Well, we're away. Good news.
I agree. But I think also another interesting part of that is that it's not only about fixing misinformation, but it's also about making people more aware that they shouldn't believe about everything they read. So I was having an interesting discussion yesterday with a person from Amnesty International, and they were sharing that they're doing a lot of work in the direction of, okay, we can just ban social media for teens, for example, because it would be probably even counterproductive, because the more something is banned, the more it's sexy and maybe you want to use it. But at least we could educate on how to approach these platforms, how to use them, right? And there is this, because we used to think that media is just true. And many people still have this natural association. So sometimes you go on, TikTok and you see a reel that is talking about something that is happening in the world. And it's just, we are just so inclined to think that that's true. So for me, it's just about educating, talking more about it. It can be in schools. It can be, adding a pop-up with warnings, can be anything. I'm not suggesting we should label apps in the same way we do it with cigarettes, but maybe we should.
No, I love this topic. I think about it a lot because it's not the platform's job to fix it. And content is not always the problem, but I worry that we're not raising critical thinkers or how to be a better consumer of media or information. I know that let me say, make sure I get the center right. The MIT Media Lab approached this topic. They were very concerned about it. And they went back and looked how ancient civilizations were forming dialogues, like around the campfire. How is that different than how we form dialogues today? And what they came back was they're asking themselves different questions when they have a conversation. They weren't asking questions of, what is your opinion of this? Or do you agree with me? It was all based, share your experience with me. So they took focus groups and had the same conversations when they were allowed to talk about their experience or give their opinion. Same topic, different questions, much different conversations. So now they're going to firms like you saying, how can we develop apps and platforms that have an engagement around experience versus yes or no answers or just your opinion?
Yeah.
Johnny made a great point about people being willing to pay for things that they trust. And to be a skosh more positive here, we are seeing some positive developments of Substack, obviously, right? People saying, hey, this reporter, they do good fact checking, they do due diligence, I trust them, I will pay directly to them. That's a positive shift. I interviewed recently the CEO of Medium, and they are seeing explosive growth. The CEO, Tony Selline, his thesis is as people are trusting less public spheres, they might write more privately into kind of their private networks that people will then pay for, right? And so I think there could potentially be an economic model where people are willing to pay for truth. Again, my concern is that will be dwarfed by all of the other non-true things out there people are paying or not paying for. But I think there is hope that we could be nudged toward truth with these economic levers.
I think that's really interesting. I've been considering that we pay a lot for publications, but it occurred to me I might want to put my value system into Google, because when I ask an AI a question, I say very specifically, give me all the viewpoints, right? Well, what if I could make that a default? And maybe this is something that's more viable with an
I love that idea.
And I would pay to say, please give me an anti-bigot perspective. Please give me a bigot perspective, and put them side by side.
Lexia, I love that vision you had of kind of actively interrogating and asking, hey, what are the values of this news source, and asking for different perspectives. I love that. And I'm going to give now, because I'm a Libra and I do on the one hand, on the other hand, on a positive and negative note. On a positive side, I think that with AI, it will get easier to create interactive content, and even whatever articles look like in a year from now, 5 years, 10 years, we'll be able to almost like Socratic dialogue. I think it's one of the most encouraging trends in education is what was once the province of the wealthy to have a tutor. In theory, every kid can have a tutor that speaks exactly the way they should be spoken to in their language, literally and figuratively. That's now doable with AI. So take that idea and bolt it onto news and media. And to Lexi, your idea of saying, hey, give me bigot mode and non-bigot mode, show me different perspectives. We can do that. So on the positive note, that is all on the table. It's all in play. My concern, though, is fundamentally people are lazy. And I think that the folks in this panel, the folks in this room who are here in Davos, taking time to engage in this conversation, yes, you will ask hard questions. You will say, please challenge me. Show me my blind spots. I don't think the average person is going to do that. I think they will say, hey, what happened? Oh, that aligns with my worldview. Awesome. Give me more of that, please. Thank you. Well, that's my concern.
Well, I have good news for you and a small story. So on the side of being lazy, I was telling you guys before this, I was trying to read Gödel Bach, which is a really hard book. And I created a Hofstede bot that basically taught me the book one Telegram message at a time. And then I was inspired by that. I love David Graeber. And so I was like, I'd love a Graeber bot. So I made myself a Graeber bot. And I'm a emerging tech investor. So I was like, please write me 5 tweets praising crypto. Now, David Graeber hated crypto and my AI bot refused. it would not do what I asked it to do. I am your master. And it was like, no, I hate crypto. Here are 5 tweets bashing crypto. And I was like, no, try again. And he's like, sure, here's a tweet. And it's like, it praises crypto. It didn't. Like, he refused. Anyway, moral of the story. One thing we can do, those of us in Davos now, we're the ones who will be building the AIs. We're the ones who'll be making the decisions on how the system prompts look in the back end, what sort of things are going to be fungible and malleable, and what sort of things are going to be hard coded. We can hard code bias, or we can hard code the identification of bias, and we can hard code if someone is going down the rabbit hole, bring them back. That's something that we all can do.
On another positive note, I think one thing that is interesting that can be done now, on my podcast, AI Curious, I interviewed a startup that is working to make it easier for companies to almost do the work that local newsrooms are no longer able to do. As we all know, for reasons that have nothing to do with AI, local newsrooms have been dying for decades, right? Local newspapers have shuttered. This AI company is saying, hey, we can transcribe courthouse minutes. We can, there are things that are happening around communities that AI can make it easier to report on. And then you have to keep a human in the loop. It's okay, now I'm going to go through and look at the highlights and make sure I'm getting this right. So I think, kind of back to your point, there potentially could be new outlets and new ways to deliver stories that are not being created right now. And also, hopefully, potentially, these even will be accurate and true. So I think there is some optimism as well.
I agree with you there. In COVID, we actually saw a huge uprising in people demanding local news, which in Britain, because of a Google update and the Panda update, most of our local publications went under. And so there are lots of different AI tools and things that started to come out to serve that. I think what's quite interesting about what you've all said here is about the real world interactions. Now, I can speak to the tangible haptic notions of that. But from an algorithmic standpoint, we're all influencing each other's algorithms by virtue of being in this room. Being in this room means we're already within a filter bubble, but we're starting to poke at it. And I think real world events, as they become more and more important again, and that we're making more effort with them, that bouncing of phones off each other, our digital algorithmic devices that we're carrying around with us, we're reprogramming them. And I think that's quite an exciting possibility. Are we going to change on from one extremist to another with that? Probably not. But what we might be able to do is, instead of having left and right, we start to increase the middle category where there's more movement and more ability to move within that section without having to turn yourself from a 0 to a 1. So that potentially, if we keep to seeing that happen, and I think we will, it's slow, it's not going to be fast, but I think there's quite a lot of opportunity there. Johnny, you had something to say.
Yeah, I'm listening to what everyone's saying. I think what I'm hearing is join a community. Mm-hmm. Right now, we feel like we're part of a community or communities, but it's very parasocial. No thanks, Jeff. But even podcasts are very, I have parasocial relationships with all my podcasters. And I think what we really need to encourage ourselves and those younger than us is that a community is a group of people who will answer the phone when you call them, know your name, right? A community isn't something that you see while you're scrolling. You're not a part of a community if you're just agreeing with this large group of people. And I think, and I'm the first to admit that I need to take my own advice, but I think we need to seek out and participate in as many communities as we can.
Totally agree. Love that.
I thought it might be quite nice to open the floor to some questions or thoughts. Is there anybody who would like to pose a question or position a thought that you would like the panelists to comment on?
Thank you. I find everything you're sharing extremely interesting, but I feel it's very much centered on Europe and North America and everywhere else in the world. And I've seen it firsthand in India and Nepal, for example. This is actually a very big mean of communicating, and social media is actually one of the main resource you're going to. And I was just wondering, we are stepping back and analyzing this, but in a specific context, is it applicable to everywhere in the world. And when this is your only mean of getting information and you don't have, for example, enough money to pay for a subscription, how do you access the news? And then how do you make sure that the news you're accessing are actually trusted?
Well, I live in Bangkok. So Thailand is the number one country in the world for average number of hours spent on mobile. So it's literally everywhere. So it's a very good question. And again, I think it's really about in what I'm seeing around me, it's a lot about education. So I don't think that we can just prohibit social media, but we can definitely educate how people consume contents on social media and their perception of truth. So something that the Thai schools, for example, and government try to do very well is to encourage people, for example, to follow influencers that have different opinions. So to always, this is a very big thing. So every time that you're a strong believer of something, you would do, at least my friends, they will also try to follow someone that is supporter of the opposite. And it's just because they try to, educate themselves in being more open-minded. But I totally understand with you that the problem is about, these communities being completely chaotic and unmoderated. So my approach to that is just to educate the consumer on how to, just not believe on everything they see.
Just to quickly chime in on that, taking a kind of wider lens view of an excellent question. To me, the North Star is that tech inevitably gets cheaper. Sure. It will get cheaper and cheaper to deploy these AI models at scale, and that will be global. So I don't know exactly when or how we'll get there, but my thesis is that globally, AI will inevitably personalize the news and make it more and more granular. I think whatever country you are, and whatever the format is, I don't know, will it be more video? Will it be more interactive? Will it be a hologram? Will it be immersive in some metaverse? I don't know. But I think eventually things will get personalized. And there's a very exciting opportunity to have that be personalized in an effective way where we're asking Lexi smart questions. Oh, show me the other side. I want to know how this other country is viewing this issue. That's possible. It's also possible that we're all going to get the news just how we like it and not see other sides. But I think wherever you are in the world, we have personalized news eventually. And to your point, Jeff, so I've actually studied a lot of algorithms outside of the UK and the US, particularly South Africa, because I was passionate about it. When I grew up, sanctions were abolished in 1991, but new media didn't come in until 1994. So I've lived in a world of sanctions. And what I've realized is that a lot of non-US, non-European countries, even some of the European, are on very outdated versions of Google. Now, for many years, their algorithms, because their algorithm used to be manually coded. Now it's self-learning, but they're self-learning from different points, right? So they're still a little outdated. The beautiful thing is the outdated algorithm is actually, I would consider a preference right now because it's not so hyper-personalized. So you're not getting this quite the same locked view. So in some ways, it will speed up over time and it will equalize. But I think there are countries that were disadvantaged by the lack of engineers focusing on algorithmic development. And now that is, in fact, an advantage. We also find in those territories that radio engagement is a lot higher. And so there is always a way to find news, and radio is better from not just a cost-effective perspective, but power, but then also data. Because we think so much about the technology and the access to these platforms, but the primary thing, first you have the device. The second is the data, and data costs are still incredibly high. But as we get more satellites up, I think we'll find a democratization of access to data. And I think that becomes very exciting for those territories. But you're not wrong. They are seeing all over the world in different countries, we are seeing slightly different news. And we're seeing slightly different targets because the economics don't add up for the search engines, right? They want to target and spend the most money for the customers they're going to spend the most on their platform.
But I think we'll find different things present over time, and there will be an equalization. But for now, I actually think there's some positivity to having an outdated algorithm.
I'm glad you brought up radio, because I saw a stat out here this week on CNBC that said African nations have the highest trust in media of anywhere in the world. It was 90%. And the US was down at the bottom. And I can see how radio would build trust because it's a voice. It's almost like someone's entering your home, reading you the newspaper. That may be one of the reasons why.
And I think accessibility as well. You can make a radio with a nail and a bit of wire, which is always quite exciting.
Well, there you have it. Thanks again to my fellow speakers and panelists, Lexi Mills, Mark Culler, Francesca Gagaya, and Johnny Gabriel. Thank you to our show's producer, Jasper Chua. And thank you to you, dear listeners. If this is your first time here at AI Curious, please consider subscribing. We're at Apple, Spotify, YouTube, all the usual places. Please send to a friend, rate it 5 stars, all that good stuff. Thanks again, and see you next time.